microphone. Thomas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I am a sociology instructor at the Anza College. I previously taught at Berkeley City College and Laney College. So in the context of this conversation, I will bring my sociological background. I know that open education is like a huge topic for discussion, for a conversation. So I just want to start by highlighting my positionality in this debate. But before I move on to me talking for about 20, 25 minutes, I don't know, I would like to start with some sort of interactive activity just to get a feeling of some of your thoughts regarding this topic. So I will throw this in the chat and I will share my screen so we can see the live results. So this is a question for all of you. When you hear open education, what is the first word or phrase that comes to your mind? And you will see, once you click on that link, you will see like a multiple choice question. It's a quick poll, and then there is a second question after that one. So let me share my screen now. We can see together the results so far. I know it is a tricky question because I'm asking you to think about the first word, but probably all of them are related. Uh, so I know that methodologically speaking, there is a flaw in that, but it's just an icebreaker. It's not like I'm going to write a paper or something like that. Okay, so we can see some results here. As of now, mostly towards affordability. Okay, that's good. Then we have in a second place accessibility and equity, and then we have freedom and other. If you want to share that other in the chat, that will be awesome. I will take a look at that at some point. Available to all. Thank you, Chelsea. And I know we are a relatively small or big group, depending on how we want to look at things. I will now throw second question in the chat. Let me just stop sharing my screen. And the second question, this one is more like an open-ended, so maybe some sort of short sentence or something like that. Can you think of an example where educational content did not represent your cultural context or life experiences? And I will do the same. I will share my screen. Maybe for this one, we can take like a couple of minutes or so, not as fast as the previous question, but as soon as you share your responses, we will see them on the screen. We have creativity here, just like a one-word sentence. In general discipline, such as English, mathematics. Okay, thank you. Famous scientists always being white men. I can resonate with that in my sociology education. Copyright. Okay. Keep them coming, please. Must text that promote only heterosexist view or examples. Statistics classes having problems that seem irrelevant. Okay, that's good. That's good. Especially this one about copyright. That reminds me, as I mentioned, I study sociology. So my honor thesis as an undergrad was a thesis about copyright and the type of barriers that imposes to access to knowledge and culture. And at the same time, how restrictive copyright policies are reshaping what we understand by knowledge and culture, or how they have become commodified, so to speak. Okay, so let's stop sharing my screen, and we will see that some of your points resonate to some of the things I will share this afternoon. So I plan to leave some time at the end for questions. I also have a couple of questions I would like to ask you, but I think the Q&A is mostly for people to share comments, thoughts, and all of that. Okay, let's see. Can you see my screen? Okay, great, thank you. So I will start with a bit of storytelling. Again, I studied sociology. Sociology for me, it was very clear that it is an Eurocentric perspective. And by that, I mean that most of the theories that we learn or we discuss are theories developed in Europe in a specific context. Yes, sociology is a science. It's the systematic study of societies, social interactions, and all of that. But it's a bit problematic to study a society using a knowledge body or a theoretical framework that was initially designed under a different situation, under a different context. Yes, we now live in a globalized world, but still, for me, as a young Venezuelan guy back then in my home country, it was kind of like, yes, interesting to read about Karl Marx and his critiques of capitalism, but then to realize that for none of them, Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, or Max Weber, those are the three founding fathers of sociology, so to speak. For the colonization was not a problem for them because that was not their reality. But in fact, our current modern world is rooted in a colonial enterprise. At least that is a discussion among sociologists, among historians, among social scientists. And that is part of the ideas I want to share today. So, but then when I started teaching here in the US using OER textbooks, uh, then I realized it is the same problem. Some of you mentioned scientific disciplines where most of the scholars are white men. Well, if you take some of the OER textbooks that are out there, you will see that is that a bunch of men, white men, and just one or two women, and just one black person. So that is telling you something about a discipline, especially this one that is uh, concerned to study society. So all the way from that moment to nowadays, I have been thinking a lot about this. As I mentioned previously, my honor thesis as an undergrad was about copyright. Then I started really reflecting on things related to cognitive capitalism or how this current economic system makes knowledge, makes culture, or turn them into a commodity, something that is just for profit. Um, but then, as you can see on the screen, I highlighted three things: open education, colonial frameworks, and decolonial movement. If you are not familiar with these terms, of course, this is a very cryptic question, but that is the question I will try to not to answer, but to invite you all to be part of the conversation. Is open education perpetuating colonial frameworks, or is it a decolonial movement genuinely empowers all learning community members? Open education, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a huge topic that is centered in the idea of openness. If you want me to provide like some sort of definition, I will say that open education is number one, a movement, a pedagogical movement, social movement, if you like. And number two, these are connected, a movement that is rooted in that idea of openness. And then as you can see on the screen, there is a big set of practices. I think open education revolves around a big set of practices. Some of you mentioned affordability. We can also think of social justice. We can also think of equity, removing barriers by using open educational resources, democratization. Then we will see to what extent we are actually democratizing the ways of producing knowledge or just amplifying an already structural, unequal way of disseminating knowledge, of producing knowledge. But simply put, is that it's a set of practices. This is not an exhaustive list. And I am aware that the history of open education as a movement is bigger than recent times where we used to think or we tend to think of open educational resources or massive open online courses or distant learning. Yes, those are part of the movement, but the movement or this idea of openness in education is not new. I mean, there are discussions or out there. So this is maybe the only part of my presentation where I am going to give you like a few minutes sociology lecture on this. But again, as a sociologist, I am interested in understanding, in examining our society. And if we are doing this big push for open education, that is not happening in a vacuum. That is happening in a specific context. And that context is our modern world. And I don't know about you, but another bit of storytelling here is when I was taking my world history classes, yes, there were a little bit global, but it was kind of like European events and then other issues around the world, but they were not covered uh, with the same amount of time or resources than the Industrial Revolution or the French Revolution or the Scientific Revolution or the Enlightenment movement, so on and so forth. Because usually those specific events that are located in a specific area, usually those are the events that I was taught explain the emergence of the modern world, especially French Revolution and the ideas of légalite, égalité, fraternité. But if we pay attention to that, that wasn't for all. That wasn't for all people because women were excluded at that time during the French Revolution and those ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity. And Black people was also excluded for that because around the same time, while white people were fighting for those three core philosophical political principles, in Haiti, in the Caribbean part of what is now the America, the continent, there was the Black Code or the Code Noir in place, which is basically a law that was regulating how to treat enslaved people in Haiti. So there is these two sides of the same coin, our modern colonial world and this theoretical framework, decolonial theory. It is a movement not only comprised of activists or intellectuals, it also involves social movements, artists, or artivists to combine activism and art practices. And the main tenet of this is that we cannot understand the history of our modern world if we overlook the colonial enterprise, if we overlook 1492 and how that parochial project that was Europe became a global enterprise by enslaving people in Africa, bringing them to the Americas, and then creating a whole set of systems of social stratification by class, by race, by ethnicity, by sex, by gender that are still in place today. So even if our countries became independent, they cut ties with their former colonizers. It's not like you press the reset button in your laptop and then you start everything from zero, from scratch. You have to carry all those colonial legacies while simultaneously build a different society. So that is still there. And that, from my perspective, my sociological perspective, that can explain some of the colonial biases in the open education movement. So simply put, all this pill of what decolonial theory is about can be summarized in three pieces just to connect that with the topic of open education. So number one, as you can read on the screen, it's a critique of power asymmetries that are deeply embedded in post-colonial societies. If we think of the US society and if we think of the historic trauma of slavery, that is not something that we can just explain by saying, oh, that's Black people, bad choices or whatever. We cannot take that individualistic approach. We need to pay attention to the systemic inequalities, to structural inequalities, let alone indigenous communities that they were confined to reservations. So that is one point. Number two, decoloniality or decolonial theory tries to unveil a matrix of power and inequities to dismantle pervasive prejudices and discriminatory and exploitative practices. Again, racism is not only an interpersonal issue. It's not only about how nice I am or not with people from different ethnic backgrounds. It is a system of interlocking oppression. It is present in policies, it is present in media content, it is present in educational content, in the hidden curriculum, in pedagogy, so on and so forth. And number three, by engaging in those two, we are paving the way for a collective platform where people and groups systematically marginalized can change that by sharing and learning from each other's life experiences, cultures, and knowledge. And I think that resonates a lot with the idea of open pedagogy, to invite everybody in a learning environment to co-produce knowledge. And if we truly recognize the different backgrounds of all the people involved in a classroom or attending a classroom, we will ensure that we are implementing what I would like to call an open intercultural pedagogical life project. It's not just something that is confined to Monday to Thursday, whatever your time schedule is for your classes. It's something that we keep ongoing. Then, as I mentioned, or before I move on to the colonial biases, I want to set the record straight and clarify that we cannot blame the open education movement for a much larger crisis. Globalization or neoliberal globalization, all the thing with climate change or whatever, that is not to blame open education for that. But for sure, if a lot of climate research is closed in the sense that it's not published in open access journals, that is also telling you something about how available knowledge, discussions, tools, solutions, proposals are or not. So just to get that clear, we cannot blame open education for that. But for sure, those systemic inequalities, that matrix of power in the economy, in politics, in culture, in our sexuality, one of you mentioned heterosexism as one of the expressions of a closed education, if you like to use that expression. So yes, with that being said, we can think from this theoretical framework of at least three colonial biases: technological barriers, content misrepresentation, and organizational diversity gaps. Technological barriers, because if we think or if we reduce open education to just digital open education resources or educational resources, or massive open online courses, or digital zero textbook costs, if we are reducing open education, which is a huge movement, just to that, there is a techno-centered understanding of this big movement. And that occurs at the risk of overlooking digital neocolonialism or the digital divide. We cannot assume that everybody has the same level of technological literacy or they have the same access of technology that we may have here in the US or in some part of the US. And if you see some statistics, globally speaking, I think the amount of people that is connected to the internet or to social media is around 60 to 70% of the total world population. So there is still 30% of people, a bunch of people that is not connected to this. So that is one of the first colonial biases. The second one is content misrepresentation. I was sharing before the session officially started that yes, it is important that in our textbooks we have better examples, inclusive phrasing, but that is not enough. Content-wise, in terms of theories, contribution, because our students are taking classes in all types of disciplines. English, biology, chemistry, sociology, history, economy, etc. So what about the people that look like our students in those subjects that they are studying? Are they not present? Why? I will bring another example from sociology. So Marx, Durkheim, Weber, they are the founding fathers. If you think of American sociologists, kind of like the same thing, white guys. Only one person, W.E.B. Du Bois, which is a Black American scholar, who coined the idea of the color line to explain racial inequalities, that his work is basically kind of like rediscovered recently. But he was, I won't say contemporary to those other three guys, but he was one of the first sociologists in the US context. And then when it comes to diversity gaps, lack of diversity in student body or faculty body, staff, administrators, it is also related to policies, way of evaluating things, so on and so forth. I know that I put some big words here on the screen. I will refer to them in my next slides. So it is time to share some evidence. It is not just a theoretical discussion. It is also grounded in research that is out there. So the first evidence I am going to share is from work conducted by Farrow et al. They are located at the time the Open University in United Kingdom, and they were reflecting retrospectively about three cases of educational technology projects in sub-Saharan Africa. They acknowledge that the term is quite colonial because that is a region with a lot of countries, with a lot of heterogeneity. So, but they are using that just for geographical purposes. Myanmar or Burma and Kenya. Basically, the projects were, two of them were related to capacity building. One of them was like training educators across all type of subjects, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Uh, but then when they were reflecting about that, they recognized that in none of the cases they were implementing a decolonized curricula. There was, in fact, a pressure to provide a rapid response in that context. And that's why they came up with some sort of conclusions when reflecting on how to manage collaboration between different partners across different regions. One, avoid paternalistic attitudes. It is all related to who is the leader and why. What is the basis for the specific role distribution? Are instructors or people from first world countries be the leaders or the creators of the content, and then the third world parties are just the assistants, so to speak? Why? Because there are some biases there. Uh, Communication strategies, communication approaches. The second lesson is related to translation, but in two ways. They were focusing on multilingualism, like to make content available in the languages of the societies you are going to work with. But this idea of English as lingua franca is part of the colonial biases as well. The second way of understanding translation is more related to sociology of science and technology. Basically, how people, even if we are using the same language, English, how the different stakeholders are sharing their perspectives, their positions, their opinions, and how the other actors are interpreting that based on their own interests or their own agendas. So that's we need to pay attention to translation efforts in that double sense, linguistic, in a linguistic sense and a sociological sense. And then again, the need to review the suitability of our content. It is representative enough in terms of content, the theories, the contributions from scholars from different backgrounds, or it's just a matter of changing the pictures, changing the captions, using a better phrasing and inclusive phrasing. It is important, don't get me wrong, but that is not addressing the core of the issue. And then last but not least, this is perhaps more rudimentary but important as well, long-term funding scenarios are also needed. Because yes, we probably resonate with all of this I'm sharing today, I hope, but still there are some mundane obstacles like funding, how to ensure that these decolonized projects are sustainable over time, how to review the content every now and then, and that require resources, all type of resources. But if we are in a system, I'm thinking of the community college system here in California, but also in the US, if we are in a system that relies around 70 to 75% of their faculty body is just part-timers, which is a contingent faculty body, it is quite hard to really embrace this project if we are basically, I won't say precarizing people's job, but for sure it's not job security. And then the second evidence is a work conducted by Adam in 2019, before the pandemic. The professor was reflecting on massive open online courses platforms in Africa, not from Africa, because one of the first highlights or results was that at that time there was, and still there is, no massive open online courses platform like Coursera, edX, or all of those that you probably are familiar with. And by analyzing those courses related to Africa, there are three things that Adam observed. Yes, there are inequalities within African countries. There are highly ranked universities that offer courses through these platforms. But number two, the partnerships between European institutions, US institutions, and African universities was not equal, because there was the case of, okay, we are going to create the content, you are going to teach the content. You are the teaching assistant, so to speak. And number three, there were courses about Africa created by European or Western universities, but they were designed without consulting African partners or African peers. And that is a very common practice when it comes to social sciences, like creating knowledge about the so-called third world without talking to the people in the third world to see what their contributions are. But not all is daunting, and I want to share some cautious hopes. One is the zero textbook cost initiatives. And we have this paper about a case study in Houston Community College. They found that when implementing zero textbook cost materials in classes, the likelihood or the probability to pass those classes, to complete those courses, increases across all ethnic groups. But if you pay attention to the ethnic groups, there are differences. In their case, they found that Asian students, they do a bit better than other peers from different ethnic backgrounds, but they are aware that they just focus on a specific variable, whether they have access or not to the textbook, and if that access is free or not. So the access hypothesis, which is what I was just explaining, is not enough to explain those sort of discrepancies. And from a sociological point of view, for sure, there are a lot of asymmetric factors behind the scenes that perhaps they go way beyond our immediate responsibilities in a classroom. But that's why our community colleges offer all type of resources like mental health support, like food pantry, all type of things to alleviate those obstacles that can impact or that can make a difference in passing or not a class or completing or not a class. And those findings are similar to other research conducted with the students regarding perceptions, positive perceptions about open educational resources, or high levels of satisfaction when using open educational resources. The last title that you can see on the screen, in fact, was conducted with the students in a master's program. So it's not just undergrad students or a community college environment. The movement is also reaching momentum across other levels of our formal education system. And then the second hope that I want to share, although it's a bit daunting because of the current context right now, it's a statement by Scott and Custer. They are from the University of South Africa. In their case, they found that students majoring in other subjects they were enrolling in high numbers in their humanities courses because there was a clear attempt to decolonize the offering, decolonize the content, basically to connect with what you can see on the right side of the screen. This figure that is here is it was published in the Future of Jobs report in 2016. That is a report prepared by the World Economic Forum in Davos, Sweden. And this is basically the core skills employers think we all need to succeed in our jobs. So we can see basic abilities, basic skills, cross-functional skills like social skills, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, negotiation. We also have cognitive flexibility, written expression, comprehension, all type of things that are connected not only to sociology or the social sciences, but with also other set of disciplines, also in the field of the humanities. The issue, though, is that while they recognize that there is a potential for liberatory pedagogy, so to speak, the context is quite daunting because there is this idea of social sciences as and humanities as not being relevant because there is an utilitarian mindset. If they are not oriented for profit, they are not relevant. But how come we have all this hype about disruptive technologies, artificial intelligence? We are all concerned nowadays about critical thinking and all of that. Well, I think social sciences and humanities, they are equipped to provide the tools, not only for digital literacy, but for critical digital literacy. And those skills are still important nowadays. The Future of Jobs Report 2025 claims that employers, they think those cross-functional skills are not going to change over the next 5 years. So it is important. Our disciplines, and this is my heart speaking, our disciplines are important. For those of you who are not in the US, recently sociology was banned from the general education curricula in Florida because, again, there is this utilitarian idea to how relevant these disciplines are or not. With that being said, and I am approaching the end of my presentation, I try to present briefly both evidence of colonial biases and certain hopes, because not all is daunting. And to build on that, I just want to share 4 possible things as pathways to decolonize open education. But first, let me acknowledge another thing. Again, we cannot blame open education for all these other multiple crises that are entangled in the society where this movement is rooted. But also, open education stands at a crossroads. That's why I wasn't trying to answer the question in the title of this presentation, but rather my purpose is to invite you to reflect collectively about all of these issues. So in terms of actions, we have knowledge diversity, not just content representation, knowledge diversity. That requires a scholarly project. That requires taking the time, the resources to update the curricula in terms of content and then find contributions from scholars that resonate to the diverse student population we have in our campuses. Interculturality, again, not only in terms of linguistics, but also in terms of uh, negotiation practices, who is not speaking, who is not at the table, and why. What can we do to bring them to the table, to make sure that we all have a voice, that we are all being heard, because that will be related to the concept of epistemic justice or cognitive justice, to recognize that there are other knowledges, that there are other experiences, and they also need to be part of the conversation. Diverse collaboration, keeping in mind the lessons I just shared, to avoid paternalistic interactions, to establish transparent communication dynamics, so on and so forth. And last but not least, structural changes. This is not within the jurisdiction of open education movement, but it still is something that we need to advocate for, that we need to bring attention to, because the idea of openness and the principles that are connected to that, one of them, social justice, is right on point with these 4 pathway. And then the takeaway before we move to some questions or comments, and I will read this from the screen. To wrap up things, decoloniality or this decolonial perspective requires reshaping the asymmetric structures that design and produce educational content and policies. Perhaps, as I mentioned, this seems like asking too much of a movement with a specific quote unquote scope. I would say it's not specific if the idea of openness is so overarching. However, the very reason the open movement awakened so many hopes decades ago is precisely the basis for keeping those dreams alive and building a society where education is a dialogic process and a fundamental human right, not a commodity, not a privilege for those who can afford it, where everybody can feel represented and respected as both learners and equally important producers of knowledge. That is my presentation, and I am open to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marx. I'm looking at the chat if there are any questions. And feel free to unmute yourself, everyone. This is a small group, so if you would like to make any comments, feel free to unmute yourself. And in the meantime, Jim shared an article and a kind of like research paper also in the chat about how textbook prices are a significant barrier against, student success or continuation in higher education. So this is very important thing. But at the same time, your reminder is like when we're looking at those open education resources, how can we make sure they are not bringing in colonizing perspectives or Eurocentric or ethnocentric perspectives? And I'll take a look at the chat, but if they don't have any questions, I'm excited to ask one.
Yes, please.
How because I'm also like a big fan of OER and zero textbook cost. What do you speak? And the reason is this: colonialism is so dangerous in these days, in our age, because it's hidden and because it's immersed in every aspect of our life. So sometimes it's really hard to see it with our bare eyes, and we have to wear our decolonizing lenses, maybe. So do you have any suggestion as we go through all these resources we have available to us? Like, what is the first thing or we look at, or what should be the process as we go through them to make sure we're picking the correct ones?
Yes, that's a great question. I would say that professional development is for sure something that will kind of address that obstacle or that challenge, similarly to professional development for accessibility, for dealing with AI. So we need professional development when it comes to developing decolonial frameworks. Because again, my experience is different in the sense that because of different reasons, different professors, different experiences, I connected with decolonial theory. But in those cases, if we are not aware of that discussion, if we are not aware of that dimension of inequality, because as you mentioned, it's very opaque, it's not clear, it requires some level of abstraction, professional development can be part of that. I know that there are excellent initiatives already out there. The Peralta Equity Rubric already contains elements about content representation, if the students can connect with the content they are learning. So there are already some venues open for this conversation. We also have the IDEA framework, inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism framework that was developed by the ASCCC OERI initiative, the whole alphabet soup. But yes, professional development will be something I would suggest, just to open the conversation to how decolonial theory or the decolonial framework is present in different disciplines. Because I can talk about sociology, but what about biology or chemistry or physics? it's not just a discussion pertaining to the social sciences and humanities. So that will be my answer.
Mhm. And Jim shared the resource you just mentioned.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes, it's in the chat. And Jim says, I was going to ask if he had any comments on it.
I will say that my comment, first, it is great that we have those frameworks because that wasn't the case previously. When I read the protocol or the guidebook they have on their website, they have a lot of examples, really cool examples to welcome our students to our classrooms, to create a safe space for everybody, a space where they can feel represented, recognized. But as I mentioned in my presentation, it's not just about the example or changing the caption or using an inclusive language. It's also how, if I am a woman in STEM or a Black person in STEM or a person from a marginalized group in all of the disciplines where usually, because of inequalities, you don't have a lot of representation. What about my people? What about people from my ethnic background, from my cultural background, doing contributions to that? So I think that will be not my suggestion, because I think the framework is important. It's already a great starting point. But it's just to keep in mind that it's not about the examples we use in LibreText or the whatever platform we are using to create our textbooks. It's about the content as well. To welcoming them, not only as I see you, but I also recognize that you produce knowledge with me, that your whole ethnic community, ethnic experience produce knowledge with me. So it's just to have that idea of co-producers of knowledge.
Hey,
Thank you,
Marx.
Chelsea.
Hi,
Go.
Chelsea. Good to see
So
you.
great to see you. Yes, thanks so much for presenting. I'm processing everything you've been sharing and just curious, like, isn't a rubric, this is some of the pause I had with our own rubric, isn't a rubric a form of, or even like a guide, like a form of colonial education in a sense? Like we got that feedback once, and I'm just curious if you have a thought about that too. Like it's not really decolonized to apply a rubric to your own teaching. It's not really like a model. If you're, anyways, yeah, I'm not sure what you think about that.
Yes, if I get it right, I think, yeah, it's not like we can apply a rubric for that, because when I think of the Peralta equity rubric, for example, you have great uh, variables there. But some people will say, what about academic freedom or my liberty to choose what I want to teach, etc., etc. But I think if we center in the focus of in the topic of equity, rather than a rubric, it's just a question of who is out in this discipline, who is not speaking, and why. Why I am not bringing examples that resonate with my students. Maybe we can create a great assignment. Maybe we can create a great discussion, but still, it is like my only purpose is to participate in the discussion, to participate in the assignment, but nobody said something from my cultural experience about these topics. So I think it's more like an ethical question rather than a rubric. But still, I am afraid I don't have a definite response for that.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Chelsea, maybe
And I
this
would,
might be an upcoming project. And Karen is
Something
not
for
a
us to chew on together. How do we reframe how do we decolonize the Peralta equity rubric?
so true. Yes.
I'm happy to participate if that is possible.
Yes,
So
please.
yeah, I would I would
More
I
brains, the
will
better.
I will share something in the chat because what I presented was published this year as a short essay or informed op-ed piece in the Journal of Open Educational Resources in Higher Education. So that is a version of what I presented today, and hopefully by next year there will be a book chapter when I explore this in more detail. So I hope to have some answers to those questions by then.
Wonderful. I'm looking at the chat and to the audience if they have any final questions before we wrap it up. And Kari has a comment in the chat. Kari, do you want to say it out loud? Feel free to unmute yourself if you're available to speak. Or I'm happy to read it for you.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared to do that, so it took me a little while to move things back on my screen. But yeah, we designed a tool, again, not necessarily a checklist or it's closer to a checklist than a rubric, but we purposely just call it a tool, and it kind of looks at a whole wider perspective, I think, of how we support students and how we design our classes. And it goes beyond just that designing to include things like how much professional development in anti-racism and in participating in book clubs and different things that our school is doing, as well as things like, do you go and support our students and the different events that our campus holds? I teach completely online, but I still try to go to different athletic events because I think it's important to have that presence and our students to be able to look out in the stands and into the bleachers and in the theater spaces and see us supporting them. So it kind of just looks at a wider use of how we support students. So we're kind of still processing it, but we've piloted for 2 years now with our honors program, and just this past fall kind of passed it around more to all the divisions on our campus. So I just have to say thanks again for like these type of conferences. I have to admit, and in the climates that we all have been working on, this is just really reaffirming to know that people are still doing the good work. So thanks.
All right, thank you so much for that comment. We appreciate it. We all, everyone in this room, in this conference, we all love the work we're doing, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're trying to do better. And every time, every year in this conference and through other conferences, we learn a lot of things. And it's kind of like there's no ending point for this work. So we love this. That is amazing. And that's all with your support. We appreciate that. Okay, so it seems like we can finalize the session and get ready for the upcoming session at 4 p.m. It is The Possibility and Perils of AI on Educational Equity by Maria Elena Martinez from Los Angeles Straight Tech College and Kimberly King from Laney College. Hopefully they will be here soon. But I would like to thank once more, Marx. Thank you for your presentation. And one thing we should keep in mind is, yes, we have open access, but open access to what knowledge? We have to question that as we look at those resources. Thank you so much. And everyone, hope to see you again in 10 minutes. And that will be the last session of day 2.
Thank you. Thank you all.